Remember that Saturday night when TikTok just kind of disappeared, like vanished in the US?
Oh, yeah.
We're diving into all that fallout from that temporary shutdown.
Yeah.
Specifically that, I don't know if you remembered, the really unexpected backlash against Mark Zuckerberg.
Oh, yeah.
And Meta.
That was crazy.
You probably felt it too, right? Just like that wave of anger and confusion. So we've got a whole stack of articles and news reports here that we're going to be going through to try to figure out what exactly went down.
It was wild. It was a fascinating moment, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Millions locked out of TikTok.
Yeah.
And instead of, I don't know, yelling at the government, the U.S. government,
right?
Who were the ones who kind of started the shutdown over, those national security concerns?
Right.
They turned on Zuck.
I know.
Yeah.
And in Instagram, I mean, it was basically a war zone.
Oh, totally.
People were so furious, accusing Meta of like hypocrisy and even trying to, capitalize on TikTok's, troubles. There were all those comments like, why do you ruin everything you touch?
Yeah.
And Reels will never be TikTok. It was brutal.
It's interesting because all that stuff about TikTok and its potential data sharing with China.
Right, which is what the government was so worried about.
Yeah, exactly. That was their main concern. But it kind of brought back all these memories of Meta's own, controversies with data sharing.
Yeah.
Like, remember back in 2018, the New York Times had that report that revealed that Facebook, which is Meta now, of course,
right,
had all these data sharing partnerships with a bunch of Chinese companies.
Yeah.
And that included Huawei, which, the U.S. government had flagged as a potential security threat.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And that wasn't even all, was it?
No.
Because just last year, there was that group of senators who sent a letter to Meta, like expressing their concerns about developers in China and Russia, potentially having access to, all that Facebook user data.
Yeah. So you can see why some people might have seen this as a bit of a double standard.
Yeah.
Like, the government's super focused on TikTok.
Yeah.
And its ties to China. But Meta has this, history of sharing data with Chinese companies as well.
Right. Okay. But data sharing can be a really complex issue.
Yeah.
What exactly does it even mean?
Well.
And why are governments so worried about it?
It's basically when companies give other companies access to, all that information they collect on users.
Right.
And this data can be, anything really.
Yeah.
Like your name, contact info, your browsing history.
Oh, wow.
Your location data, even like what you like and comment on.
Really?
Yeah. So governments are worried because, if this data gets into the wrong hands, it can be used for like all sorts of bad stuff.
Like what?
Like identity theft, surveillance.
Oh, gosh.
Even like manipulating elections.
Wow.
Yeah, it could be a big deal.
So in TikTok's case, the U.S. government is basically worried that the Chinese government could potentially get access to all that user data.
Yeah.
Through, TikTok's parent company, ByteDance.
Exactly, which is based in China.
Right.
And even though TikTok has said, like over and over again, that they don't share data with the Chinese government.
Right.
That concern is still there, especially with, China's national security laws and all that, which could, force companies to cooperate with intelligence agencies.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's complicated.
And Meta has similar, agreements with other companies, right?
They do, but those agreements are all under different, legal frameworks and oversight.
Okay.
Facebook and Meta, remember, they operate under U.S. law.
Right.
Which has, different regulations and safeguards compared to China.
Okay.
So the level of concern and the potential risks with data sharing aren't necessarily the same for both companies.
This whole situation really gets to the heart of, all those power dynamics at play, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
You've got governments worried about national security.
Yeah.
Tech companies, trying to protect their business interests.
Yeah.
And then users just kind of stuck in the middle.
Right in the middle.
It's crazy.
It really raises some big questions.
Yeah. Like what?
Like, do users even understand the data they're sharing?
Right.
And the potential risks that come with it?
Yeah.
Do they feel like they have any control over their data at all?
Right.
And then, how should governments balance those national security concerns with protecting individual privacy and freedom of expression?
That's tricky.
It's a tough one.
Yeah, these are definitely tricky questions with no easy answers. But what I find so fascinating is that this whole shutdown, this whole thing with TikTok, it really ignited this firestorm of user activism.
Oh, yeah.
It was crazy. And it wasn't just, angry comments and stuff either.
Right.
Remember, lights out Meta?
Oh, yeah. How could you forget?
people were like actually urging each other to, boycott Facebook and Instagram for like a whole week.
Yeah, a whole week.
It was crazy.
That really shows you like how much people care about these issues, and like the power of these online communities to just like mobilize and do something.
Yeah.
They took a stand and said, we're not going to tolerate this.
Yeah.
This lack of transparency and you just disregarding our data.
Yeah. And it's interesting because while some people were, boycotting Meta, other people were like flocking to these alternative platforms.
Yeah.
Did you hear about Red Note and Lemon 8?
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah, they saw a huge surge in downloads.
Yeah.
During that whole TikTok blackout.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Both platforms, they offer like similar features to TikTok.
Okay.
Like short form videos, music integration, and like a strong focus on creativity and community.
Yeah.
So they gave, like a familiar space for those displaced TikTok users.
Right.
Like a place where they could still, create and connect with other people.
So they basically like capitalized on the whole situation.
Totally.
And positioned themselves as like these TikTok alternatives.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
It's interesting that, their success.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder, like, does this mean like things are changing in the social media landscape? Like, are we moving toward a more, fragmented online world?
Oh, interesting.
With different platforms like dominating different regions.
Yeah.
Or will, the big guys, Meta and TikTok, will they eventually come back and be on top again?
That's a good question. Because remember, just when things were getting like really intense, there was that sudden plot twist.
Oh, yeah.
TikTok was back. President Trump announced that delay on the ban, much to the relief of like millions
of people. Yeah.
It was crazy.
It was like a total turnaround. Social media just exploded in celebration and everyone just flocked right back to TikTok.
Ew.
It showed you just how powerful TikTok is and how much people rely on it for, entertainment, connection, even their livelihood.
I know, it's crazy.
Yeah.
But even though TikTok is back, for now, its future in the U.S. is still so uncertain.
Yeah.
The government's still, pushing for TikTok to sell off its U.S. operations to like an American company.
Yeah.
And if that doesn't happen, they could still, face a complete shutdown.
It's true.
This whole situation really highlights that tension, that ongoing tension between the U.S. and China.
Yeah.
And how, technology is just becoming this like battleground in this geopolitical rivalry.
A big deal.
Yeah. It really raises concerns about, the future of the internet. Like, are we going to see a more fragmented online world where, your access to information and different platforms is just determined by like national borders and political agendas?
It's a scary thought.
Okay, let's bring this back to you, the listener.
Right.
What does this all mean for you?
I think it just highlights how important it is to really understand the data that you're sharing online.
Yeah.
And the potential risks that come with it. Just being mindful of like the apps that you use, the information you're sharing, the privacy settings that you choose. Like, remember, your data is valuable. It's worth it to take steps to protect it.
It's also a good reminder to, think critically about all that information that you're consuming online.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, we're just bombarded with views and opinions
all the time,
from all sides, from every angle.
And it's so hard to know what to believe.
It really is.
It is. So much of this just comes down to trust.
Trust.
Can you trust the platforms that you're using?
Can you trust the governments that are trying to, regulate all these platforms?
That's a good question.
It is.
And trust is, essential.
Yeah.
But it's also something that needs to be earned.
Right.
Companies need to be transparent about how they're using your data and give you more control over your privacy.
Yeah.
And governments, they need to be clear about like what their motives are and make sure that, any regulations that they put in place are actually about protecting national security and not about, stifling competition or censoring voices that they don't agree with.
Right.
It's a fine line.
Feels like we're at kind of a crossroads here, right?
Yeah.
We've got these incredibly powerful tech companies, governments trying to, assert their authority, and users who are starting to like really demand more control.
Yeah, it's definitely a recipe for some kind of disruption.
It is. And this whole saga, right?
Yeah.
With TikTok and Meta, it's just one example of like Yeah.
These broader shifts that are happening all over the digital landscape, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It feels like there's just like this growing awareness now of, the power that these platforms have and like all the potential consequences that can come from their actions.
Oh, yeah. And lights out Meta was a pretty clear signal, right?
Oh, yeah.
Users aren't just these passive consumers anymore. Right. They're willing to like take a stand and actually try to hold these companies accountable.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a huge force, right?
It is.
When users come together and like demand change, that can have a real impact. Like we've seen it with other social movements.
For sure.
And we're starting to see it happen in the tech world too.
Yeah.
So like, what does this mean for the future?
Well,
are we headed toward like a world where every country has its own internet, its own social media platforms, all controlled by, their own governments?
That's definitely a possibility, but I don't think it's inevitable.
There's a lot of pushback against that whole idea of like a fragmented internet.
Right.
A lot of people still really believe in the power of like a global interconnected online world.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So what about the tech companies? Can they survive all this? Like growing scrutiny and pressure?
Well, they're going to have to adapt for sure.
Yeah.
Transparency is going to be key. Like users want to know how their data is being used.
Right.
And they want more control over it.
Of course.
Those companies that just refuse to even acknowledge these concerns and like make changes, they're probably going to face more backlash.
Yeah.
And they'll probably end up losing users.
Probably.
Yeah.
So where does that leave you, the listener?
Well,
what can you do?
First of all, don't be afraid to just like ask questions.
Okay.
If you don't know how a platform's using your data, just reach out to them and ask them.
Yeah.
If you don't like what they say. Consider using a different platform or like adjusting your privacy settings.
So it's about like being an informed and empowered user.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Don't just blindly accept those terms of service,
Right.
Or just like click through and use the default settings.
Yeah.
Take some time to figure out what you're actually agreeing to and like make choices that actually align with what you believe in.
Yeah. I like that. And if you see something that just seems wrong, don't be afraid to, speak up.
Of course not.
Share your concerns with like your friends, your family, online communities.
Yeah.
Even like contact your elected officials.
Exactly. Let them know what you think.
Yeah.
The future of the internet, it's not like set in stone.
Right.
It's something we're all kind of creating together.
Through our choices.
Through our choices and our actions.
Wow, that's a powerful thought.
Yeah.
So as we're kind of wrapping up this whole deep dive into the, TikTok versus Meta saga, what's like the one thing you want our listeners to walk away with?
Just remember that you have a voice.
Yeah.
You have power. Don't be afraid to use it.
Well said. This whole situation has been
a wild ride.
A wild ride. It really has.
Yeah.
And it's definitely not over yet.
No.
But like one thing's for sure.
What's that?
It's a wake-up call for all of us.
Yeah.
We need to be, more aware, more engaged, more proactive in, shaping the future of the digital world.
I couldn't agree more.
Well, hey, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
It's been great having you on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed,
yes,
and stay empowered.